So we're continuing on in our first unit by looking at the fundamentals of what this class is all about. What is this class about? Well, it's about logic, logical reasoning, argumentation, how to do it, and it's about rhetoric. Rhetoric and logical argumentation, or as the ancients kind of described it, philosophy, have always had a tenuous relationship. Ever since the time of the ancient Greeks, there have been those who, the philosophers argued, are on a search for truth and understanding, and there have been those who have profited off of others by teaching them how to use words in a particular way to get what they want. According to philosophers, these are two very different things. The people who practiced rhetoric back during those times were known as the sophists. If you've ever heard of sophistry, we get that word from it. And I would say all of these things have a place in our communication, in our politics, and our analysis and understanding of texts. I hope to put something of a positive spin on rhetoric, given it's been so intensely looked down upon throughout the last few millennia. But what we're going to be talking about today can be used for insidious purposes. Okay? Last time I taught this class, I had my students sign a pledge that they would not use this stuff for evil, and that I was not responsible for anything that they do with it. I'm not going to make you sign that pledge. But, just keep in mind, a tool is a tool. It can be used for good or evil. Try to use it for good, if you can. All right, so let's get into it. So what have we looked at so far? Well, we haven't made much explicit, but primarily we've been looking at rational argumentation, right? Logical arguments. What an argument is. What makes an argument good. How to justify arguments. The properties of arguments, all that stuff. And logical fallacies. Misuses or misapplications of reason. In this class, I think it might be helpful to distinguish between three different things that we'll be looking at all semester. Critical thinking, rhetoric, and logical argumentation. We're going to define critical thinking as follows, because this basically is a class on critical thinking, how to do it, and how to apply it. Critical thinking, we'll say, is the use of reflection, analysis, and reasoning capacities to form judgments about things. Now, when I use this word judgment, I don't necessarily mean something negative, but an evaluation, to form an evaluation about something, whether it's true or false, good or bad, cool or uncool, practical, impractical. Critical thinking is what we're doing when we're reflecting, analyzing, and evaluating things using our reason. Pretty sensical, right? Common sense. We can distinguish that from a more specific thing called logical argumentation, which we've spent the last 2 days talking about. We could say that that's the use of critical thinking in the construction of reasonable, justifiable arguments. So it's using reason to make claims about the world and using reason to try to back them up. The evidence, statistics, whatever it is. Things that logically support the claim. We can further distinguish these two things from rhetoric, which is more general and wide in scope. In fact, you could say logical argumentation is one particular subtype of rhetoric. What is rhetoric? It's the art or study of persuasion in speech and or writing. What people are trying to do when they use rhetoric is persuade people of something or persuade them to act in a certain way. There are a lot of different ways of doing this. There are a lot of different rhetorical devices one might use to persuade someone of something. As we'll see today, logical argumentation is just one kind of rhetoric, one application of rhetoric. So we're kind of widening our scope today. We're going to look at a bunch of different factors that people employ that we might consider if we're just trying to persuade people of stuff. This happens in science class, all areas of study, politics, the media, so on and so forth. Rhetoric is everywhere. Once you start spotting it, it's hard to unspot it. Is this making sense so far? All right, good. So, rhetoric is the art or study of persuasion in speech and or writing. What we might call texts. Normally when we think about the word text, we think about a book or an article or, some website. But philosophers and rhetoricians tend to use that word in a wider, more general way. A text is something that expresses something that you can read or interpret. So when we're looking at rhetoric today, in all the ways that it might show up, we're going to look at how we can use it in books, how we can use it in speeches, how people use it in political cartoons, in other forms of messaging. We might call all of those things texts of a certain kind, insofar as they transmit information, and they can be read or interpreted in various ways. So, we have a little political cartoon here that is rhetorical. I told you rhetoric is the art or study of persuasion in texts. Just because you're trying to persuade someone of something does not mean you're necessarily trying to manipulate them. You can use rhetoric to manipulate people into thinking a certain way, believing something, acting a certain way. Rhetoric is not inherently manipulative, but it may be used for those purposes. Sometimes it's used intentionally with a specific design, trying to achieve a specific outcome. But most of the time, people do this unconsciously. There are various tricks and devices that we employ in order to get people on our side or persuade them of something, right? For example, we'll get into this later. I'm not trying to do this, but one rhetorical device that I'm using right now is I'm walking around the classroom. This is just something that I do when I lecture. I talk, but if I were to stand still and talk like this the whole time, that would give you some sort of different experience of what I'm saying, right? And would affect how my words land. Whether or not you're interested, you find them enchanting, and so on. So, this is something that people use intentionally, consciously, but a lot of people employ these kind of rhetorical devices without trying to. Okay? It's a natural way of how we learn to communicate and share our thoughts and feelings in society. And it can be employed in a bunch of different kinds of domains, in a bunch of different kinds of texts. Articles, books, cartoons, like this one here. Or cartoons like, Toonami, or something like that. In speeches, artwork often is trying to get across some sort of message. The way that the artist produces that piece of art is done so in a particular way to produce some kind of sensation. A lot of art nowadays is political in nature, so they're trying to drive home or persuade you of a certain political message. Basically, almost anything that contains some sort of information that is being shared, you can use rhetoric to do that. See it in movies, music, all that stuff as well. So, rhetoric is everywhere. That's why it's important that we understand it. We understand the different ways that people apply it so that you can spot it for yourself and so that you can use it as a tool yourself should the time come. For example, you might want to know a little bit of rhetoric if your family's being held hostage and you're trying to convince the person to shove off. That would seem like a serious situation you would want to fix. The reading for today gave us a helpful acronym that can clue us into some of the things we might want to consider if we're analyzing a text for rhetoric or if we want to employ rhetoric ourselves. This acronym is SOAPS. You know, soaps like from Lush, which has great soap, by the way. There are a lot of different factors that we humans employ in order to make a text more persuasive or to persuade someone of something. Okay? The subject of the text matters. What is the text about? What is the topic of the text? Based on the topic that you're talking about or the subject, that's going to impact whether or not your persuasion is successful, whether or not your speech or cartoon or book lands. There are some topics or subjects nobody wants to touch. There are others that everybody wants to touch. And so just by framing your text around a particular topic, you're already doing something there that is going to increase or decrease your chances of persuasion. Okay? The next letter in the acronym is O, which can stand for occasion or context. This has a lot of different factors. The time and place that a text is given, the circumstances, atmosphere, environment, attitudes, and events surrounding the text. So, for example, let's say I'm trying to persuade you that philosophy is useful and cool. Would I have an easier time persuading you of that in the classroom or when we go out drinking later tonight at the local bar? Here, right? You don't want to talk about the use and value of philosophy when you're trying to get shit-faced with your buddies, right? You want to shoot the shit, right? So, where and when a text is delivered is important. It's going to affect how persuasive the person is going to be in the message they're trying to deliver. Or we could talk about the events surrounding when a speech or text is written. Historical events. Did the person give the speech before or after the rally in which they admitted they were racist? That's going to affect whether the speech lands, right? How are the people feeling at this time in society and culture? Do people look favorably upon the subject or not? Are tensions high or are people relaxed and easygoing and happy? Are people well fed or are people upset? What is the political and social atmosphere like? You might even get more literal at this and be like, what the hell is the environment like? If there's a meteor crashing towards Earth and we're all going to die tomorrow, why would you waste time listening to me talking to you about rhetoric if I try to persuade you that it's useful or good? You don't give a shit. You're like, I want to party it up before I die. Or finish that coding project or whatever it is. Okay? So the occasion, the context is also really important. Similarly, who you're speaking to is important. Who's reading the text? Who's interpreting the text? Who are you talking to? To whom is the text directed? Are you more likely to get people to donate money to your church if you're talking to a bunch of atheists or your Christian conservative family members? Right? Are you more likely to raise awareness about environmental concerns in a room in which people don't give a shit about the environment? Or in a room full of other people who are open-minded and want to hear what you have to say, right? I know this seems very basic and commonsensical, but these considerations are very important. Because when you read or interpret a text, figuring out kind of what this stuff is and what it is like will give you a deeper understanding of what the text is trying to do, why it is formatted and structured the way that it is. Perhaps it'll help you predict whether or not the text will be successful, whether or not yours will be successful. If you get some of this wrong, if you don't frame your subject properly, if you give it at a bad time, if you give it to the wrong people, it's not going to land, right? So it's important that we get this all out on the table, even if you think it's boring and, oh, Professor Gunner, I could have thought of that. It's important. The purpose the speaker wants to achieve is also going to influence the success of a text, the success of your project of persuasion. Let's say I'm giving you a speech on why you should give me money. Are you likely to give me money because I say, I just want money and I like money? Or are you more likely to give me money if I say, I want money so I can set up this nonprofit. I'm delivering a text to persuade you to set up, to give me funds to set up this nonprofit that's going to educate people in mathematical literacy. You're like, yeah, okay, that's a good cause, that's a good purpose, a good reason. I'll give you some cash. Here's $5. Right? But if I just said, money me, money now, I like money, you're going to be like, bro, I'm a poor college student. What are you talking about? Get out of here. Divining the purpose of a text will also give you insight into some of these other factors as well. Why the author made the decisions that they did. About how they formatted it, about how they wrote it, the language, all of that stuff. And finally, this one perhaps might be the most important because, well, people love and hate people. Right? So who produced the text, who's giving the speech matters. Would you be more willing to listen to what I have to say about rhetoric as if I was giving it or Donald Trump? If I was giving it or President Joe Biden? We have relationships with people in our lives. There are people we love, people that we're indifferent to, people that we hate. So who produces the text, who expresses the information and relays that to the audience, is also going to play a very formative role in all this other stuff, right? Because everybody is unique, it's going to determine, why the text was created, for what purpose, maybe who they're speaking to, all that stuff, whether or not the text is going to be successful, whether or not the persuasion is going to work. So, remember this acronym, SOAPs. SOAPs, like you're washing your body. These stuff are all considerations that you're going to want to think about if you're producing a text yourself, if you're designing a product yourself and you're trying to sell it, if you're trying to persuade someone of something, and then when you're looking at other people's speeches and texts and cartoons and products. Okay? Because all of these things influence the nature of the text. Make sense? Good. Okay. Now, this reading also went over a few different kinds of appeals that we might make in order to persuade someone of something. Are y'all familiar with the rhetorical triangle? Did that image show up in the book? I can't remember. Yeah? Okay, so what are the three appeals that we can make in order to persuade someone of something? 3 Greek words. I'm sure you heard it in your English class growing up.
Ethos, logos, pathos.
Exactly. Yeah. This information has been around for a long time. This way of, how you might say, producing a text to have maximum effect. I believe it was Aristotle in his seminal text, Rhetoric, where he talks about this. Talks about making these appeals. They are ethos, or ethos, logos, and pathos. And as we'll see, they're all designed to target different things. If you're making an appeal to somebody's reason, to their critical thinking skills, to their rationality, do what's logical, Blaze. Utilizing logos, right? If I'm trying to convince you that I'm a trustworthy guy and you should listen to me and I'm a good person and I know what I'm talking about and I have all these credentials, I'd be utilizing ethos. Trying to make me seem trustworthy so that you'll believe me. If I'm trying to lean on your emotions and trigger some emotion in you so that you'll get fired up and listen to what I have to say and follow me, that would be pathos. And we're going to go through each of these individually. This is just a brief overview slide. It's common that a speaker or an author will use all 3 of these, consciously or unconsciously, in the text that they produce. There aren't really clear-cut, hard and fast distinctions that hold at all times between these. They often bleed into one another in application. So, they often show up together in various ways, depending on, again, who the speaker is, what they're writing about, what their purpose is, etc. But we see it in all different kinds of texts, whether it's music, movies, TV shows, lectures, articles, books, research, whatever. Okay, so let's now go through them individually. We'll talk a little bit about what these Greek words mean, how to apply this, what it means to apply it, all that kind of stuff. We'll start with ethos or ethos. Coming from the Greek for character, this appeal is all about the speaker or the author trying to establish their own credibility in some way so that they can persuade their audience of something. So, for example, if I said, I've been studying philosophy for over 15 years. I have a lot of expertise in this. I'm working on a few books. I've given many lectures. You can check them out on YouTube. I know what I'm talking about when it comes to philosophy. Maybe that'll help, build up your trust in me so that you'll listen to me and you won't just say, fuck Professor Gunner, I'm not listening to what he says. Okay?
Would you say that was a fact?
Yeah. Yeah. I wouldn't lie to you, unless maybe I'm using rhetoric. But no, it is a fact. So this might come in a variety of forms. The speaker might explain their background, their education, their qualifications, their experience that is relative to what they're trying to convey, right? I'm trying to convince you that drunk driving is bad. My son was killed by a drunk driver, let me tell you. Now that's a lie, but you could see how that would be effective, right? If somebody said that. I don't have any kids. What it's all about is establishing the credibility. Okay? The speaker is trying to move you to trust them. That's what it's about. It might also involve trying to draw some sort of connection between our shared experiences, our values, our ideals, etc. So I might invoke, we're all cool people here, We know it's cool. All right, check this out. And then I try to convince you of something. Or, we're both Christian, right? So let me persuade you of this idea or this view. You care about oppression, don't you? We both care about that. We're on the same team. Listen to what I have to say here. Let's work together. Right? So, at bottom, what this appeal basically attempts to do is establish some sort of relationship or connection between the speaker and the audience. By forming that relationship, by building that bridge, by constructing that connection, it's more likely that the audience will listen to what the speaker has to say. That they will trust the speaker, that they will lean on them, that they will see them as reliable, as somebody who gives them true and useful and good information that they should be listened to. Okay, you got that one? Make sense? You're all hard workers and smart people here. I'm sure you got it. Maybe that's a little ethos, Okay, how about logos? Well, this word has meant a lot of different things throughout the history of philosophy. It can mean logic, it can mean word, it can mean speech, it can mean reason. It's a word that has had a lot of different meanings. But what's important is the spirit of the appeal. What's the spirit of the appeal? Excuse me. It's basically this. You're trying to appeal to the person's reasoning faculties, their logic, their critical thinking. Because there is this, how should we put it, drive or priority in Western society ever since the emergence of philosophy that being rational and reasonable is good, right? So if you share that view, if I appeal to your reason, your rationality for why I think something is true, well, that might be more effective, right? If I'm trying to walk you through a line of argument, and in the back of your mind you're thinking, well, yeah, it's rational, this is reasonable is good, okay, I'm listening, so on and so forth. It could mean the speaker's trying to use logic and reason to persuade someone of something, or it could mean I'm trying to convince you that you're logical and reasonable for listening to what I have to say, and so you should keep doing that. And take it in and internalize it. You might do this in a variety of ways. You could see how this is similar to ethos, right? If you're trying to use logic to convince someone of something, or trying to get one to critically think about the issue so that they will reasonably come to your side, you might use statistics, research, evidence. This might bleed into ethos because, I might say, I have a lot of experience in research in this area. I've been logically analyzing this stuff for a while. I know what I'm talking about, right?
I want to talk about the statistics ones because I feel I feel like there are certain people out there who will produce statistics to support their own narrative.
For sure, yeah. Absolutely.
I never look at abortion statistics. Never.
Okay.
Just because I know that people want to support one side or the other. There's no way you're going to get one legit. So I mean, like you could pull statistics for one side or the other.
Yeah.
And willingly or not knowing that, it could support one side or the other.
Yeah, right.
Because I mean, I feel like you could. That's exploitative.
Humans have been using statistics for a long time to convince people of other things. And there are ways to make those numbers look good for your side, right? Depending on the methodology you employ, the model that you use, the analysis that you engage in, right? Yeah, that use of statistics is rhetorical because you're trying to persuade someone of something, right? I think it was Mark Twain who said there are lies, damned lies, and then statistics. Yeah, because you can use that stuff to construct all kinds of evidence and arguments. Doesn't mean that that evidence is good, doesn't mean that those arguments are true, but yeah, you can do that. What we're outlining here are just the various things people employ in order to get someone to rationally accept something or convince someone rationally of something. So you might use statistics to do that. Arguments, evidence, research, examples, expert testimony, right? This was something that we talked a lot about last time. And you can use this stuff to create a rational argument to appeal to the audience's rationality too. If you're clear in your speaking or writing, it might be helpful for you to express in a clear and concise way the relationships between the premises of your argument and your conclusion in a justifiable way. People are able to persuade others of things in a wide variety of instances by using unclear language or messy and fuzzy arguments. If you're talking to somebody who cares, though, about being rational and logical, you're probably not going to be able to slip that past them, right? So you'd have to make these relationships explicit and say, okay, here's my premise, here's how it's connected to this, here's how it's connected to this. The conclusion follows from all that. You can see it for yourself, right? Because we all have this capacity for reason and critical thinking. Whether or not we employ it is a different question. For example, when you're doom scrolling on Twitter until 3 a.m, right? And so what this could also involve, if you're trying to be thorough, if you're trying to rationally persuade someone of something, is anticipating counter arguments or rebuttals, what someone might say to you, right? I think we live in a simulation. Now, regular people are going to say, we don't have evidence for that. But look at all this evidence about our universe being holographic. Look at how there are fixed laws. We can't go faster than the speed of light. It sounds like a piece of fucking code, if you ask me. A limitation on the program. Yeah? So anticipating counter arguments or pieces counter to your view. Making concessions can help. Right? If you're just completely defensive and stuck in your view and you're arguing with someone and you don't concede any of what they say, what's their likely response going to be? What are you talking about? No, I don't believe you. But if you're like, yes, I agree, there's inequality and that's bad, I want to fix that. We're just disagreeing about how to get there. Let's just talk about that, right? And if how you speak and the concessions that you may make your argument more persuasive, right? Because you're presenting yourself as somebody who's not a know-it-all, somebody who's relatively humble, somebody who's willing to accept when they're wrong, so on and so forth. This raises your audience's view of you, right? And then, of course, it might also involve refuting other people's arguments, showing where they go wrong or astray, and by doing that, that might provide strength for your view. Okay, so we have two so far, ethos and logos. Appeal to character, appeal to logic or reason. Last one we have is pathos. Coming from the Greek and similar to the Latin word passere, meaning to suffer with, that's where we get pathos from. Rather than trying to establish your own credibility or trying to logically convince someone of something, pathos appeals to what? Emotions, right. You're appealing to the emotions or feelings. Or hopes, or dreams, ideals perhaps, fears, prejudices. Appealing to what we might say are the non-rational components of a person. Not irrational. It might be rational to feel fear when you're facing down a lion, but fear is a non-rational thing. It's a different thing, right, than reason. So if you appeal to this stuff, if you appeal to the non-rational aspects of someone, you're engaged in pathos. What is the overall purpose of doing this? What's the goal? It's to produce a certain emotion or feeling in the person, right? Trying to produce perhaps a certain sensation. This can be very powerful. If I convince you all that you should be afraid of dihydrogen monoxide, you might be more willing to vote for a politician who's going to pass a ban on it, right? If I can convince you that you should be angry at what this guy did, I can set things right. I know how to make things right. Then you'll be more willing to listen to me, right? Because you're all fired up. You're all emotional. Because what happens when somebody becomes overcome by their emotions? What are they unable to engage in? Right, critical thinking, right? And thinking things through logically, objectively, rationally. Yes, exactly. These processes and these mental states play off of two fundamentally different systems inherent to the human mind. What are sometimes called System 1 and System 2. One is fast, designed to produce a quick reaction, is not consciously reflective. You can associate instinct with that, reaction with that. The other is slow, methodical. It's that system that we are activating when we're engaged in conscious reflection. So if you can get somebody into System 1, and they're in there and they're reacting and their stuff is processing really fast and nothing is slowed down, you can get them to think and behave in certain ways that are good for you. Okay? And there are a bunch of different ways to do this. You can't list them all, right? You can appeal to any of these things that people have felt or do feel. You can use literary devices, right? Images, simile, metaphor, this kind of figurative language. Personal testimony, I could use that to get you on my side, right? Last night I was walking through my apartment and I stubbed my toe real bad. You stubbed your toe, right? I felt like my foot was going to fall off. Will you give me some money for the operation? All right, whatever. Appeal to your experience. Talk about a personal experience that I've had that we share so that I can get you empathizing or sympathizing with me. Sometimes catching people off guard with humor can be effective. It can disarm people, right? In essence, what this is about is trying to activate or evoke emotion. Because people will do things they otherwise wouldn't do if they're filled with a certain kind of emotion. Or if they're swept up in a crowd, right? Or a mob. Okay, does this make sense? All right, good. So those are the three general appeals that thinkers, rhetoricians for a long time have analyzed and argued that these are useful ways to persuade people. If we talk about writing more generally, rather than just appealing to the character or the experience or the education of a person, we could say there are a bunch of different rhetorical devices that people use in writing to make a case, to argue a case, to persuade people. There are a lot of them. And I did not write them all down here. It might be a good exercise for you to see if you can think up more. There are a lot of things that people do when they're trying to persuade someone of something in writing. This one's commonsensical, but the words that they use, right? If I'm using words that you understand, you're going to be able to understand me and process what I have to say. If I start spouting off all this highfalutin jargon, I'm not going to persuade you of anything because you don't know what the hell I'm talking about. Right? That's just one example. Maybe there are certain words that you have a personal history or connection to. Right? Some names are like this. Hearing the name of your ex, maybe that will set you off. And maybe I know that, and so I'll use it in my sentence, and that'll get you in a certain emotional state. So the words that you use are going to impact how persuasive you are, how successful your rhetorical project is, how the meaning, the information is conveyed, and how it lands. We can contrast this with lack of words used. Right? For the same reason that I talked about before, maybe I don't want to piss you off, and so there are words that I won't use. Topics I won't bring up, because I'm trying to get you on my side and I don't want to piss you off. Right? Let's say for Oliver, whenever he hears the word abortion, let's just say that. If I'm trying to get him to give me money, I'm not going to bring up abortion. I'm not going to use that word. Right? Or for example, if you're talking to people from other social groups, there are certain words you will not use, right? For a variety of good reasons. Slurs, right? You'll use other words instead. So, pay attention to what words are used in a text and what words are not used, especially when you're reading scientific or research-based articles, because that will tell you a lot about what the people are trying to argue for and what they're trying to convince you of. How about the order of words? Y'all can understand what I'm saying because what I am saying now to you follows the general word order of English. But like Yoda talk I do with words when I want, confused maybe you will be.
It's pretty good.
Is that all right? I don't know. I haven't watched Star Wars in a while. But you see how the order of words will matter, right? Sometimes maybe you want to include something right in the middle of the sentence. Maybe you want to do it at the beginning. Maybe you want to do it at the end. It depends on your purpose. The order of the words matter. When you're constructing a speech, let's say one of you becomes valedictorian, you are going to obsess over this stuff, right? Because it's going to affect how your speech is perceived, how people feel about you. If they decide, oh yeah, I like that person, they're cool. Whether or not you can convince them of the wisdom that you've come to over the last 4 years at Seton Hill. This one is related to the first one. Words have connotations, right? There are meanings that are associated with them, even if those meanings are not a part of the definition of a word. For example, whole bunch of connotations with the word racist. Right? Whole bunch of connotations with the word Holocaust. Whole bunch of connotations with the phrase white power. Right? When these words are used, there's more meaning there than just the definition conveys. And because there's more meaning, more information there, it's going to have a certain effect on the people hearing them or reading them. So, you want to think about what that extra meaning is. And maybe when you're criticizing or analyzing somebody else's text, that will play an important role in whether or not you think what they're saying is right or wrong, justified or unjustified. Maybe they're giving away too much. Maybe they're not saying enough with the words that they used, so on and so forth. Tone of writing is really important, right? Let's say you're extremely logically and rationally minded. Are you going to be more easily convinced by something if somebody looks at things objectively and they write in a neutral way? Or are you going to be more convinced by something if the person instead says, "You suck, everybody sucks, listen to what I have to say, I'm angry in my writing, I'm angry at the world"? No, that'll probably turn you off, right? You don't want to be yelled at when you're reading a book, right? Oh, but of course it depends on your disposition. It depends on the purpose of the author. Maybe the author is trying to spark a certain emotion in you, get you to do something. So tone is really important. You see this in scientific articles, right? They're going to write with a very formal tone, lots of jargon and scientific words, terms of art, terminology. They're not going to write a scientific article like their personal journal entry. Right? That would not be a good way to persuade the reader of evidence that they've come to or convey the information they're trying to convey. Let's see, is this going to pop up? There we go. Similar to word order, sentence structure. As much as it sucks, if you can't form a complete sentence in our society, people are going to think you're dumb and they're going to look down on you. Right? It shouldn't be that way, but that's the way it is. So, the grammar of your sentences, the structure of your sentences, the syntax that you employ, all of that stuff is also going to play some sort of role in how the text lands. So, for example, if you're applying to MA or PhD programs, you're going to make sure that your sentence structure is good, that you have complete sentences, that there are no grammar mistakes, right? Because otherwise they're going to look at it and say, throw it out, right? That guy can't even write a sentence. Ugh. He's not worth coming to MIT. What's bigger than sentence structure? Paragraph structure. How do they teach you to write in school in a way that forms a cohesive logical argument? Topic sentence, explanation, analysis, summary sentence in a paragraph, right? And you repeat ad nauseum until you've said everything you need to say. We could also bring up here not just how the sentences are ordered in a paragraph, but what the format of the paragraph itself is. Writers play with this a lot when they mess with the formatting of words on pages, sentences on pages, and so do poets, right? The break in your expectation of the way that a sentence or paragraph is structured can have a profound effect on the reader. If anybody wants an example of that, go read House of Leaves. Crazy book with weird formatting, appendices, stories from multiple perspectives, all of that invokes a certain experience, right? People love that book. Punctuation. Let's say you're texting your girlfriend and you're like, "How you doing, baby?" "I'm fine, period." What are you thinking? What the fuck did I do? She's pissed at me. She put the period there. She never puts the period there. Right? Or, if there's an exclamation point instead, "How are you doing, honey?" "I'm great!" Exclamation point. Or "I'm great, period." Mean two very different things. Right? Even just that little piece can have a profound effect on the message that you convey and how it lands. Right? Or, "How you doing?" "I'm great." You're like, what's going on? Like, what? It's a weird thing to say. I don't know what to think right now. So you can play with these things, and they have an impact. Is this making sense? I'm just trying to make explicit for you all of the different things that you're going to want to think about if you're producing a text yourself for a particular purpose, and things that you're going to want to look out for when you're analyzing a text, if you really want to get to the bottom of it. Again, rather obvious, but font size, font style, font color. This is other stuff in writing. You see this all the time on advertisements, right? They don't use Times New Roman 12-point black font. They use big letters that are bursting out of the advertisement, that are seductive maybe, trying to draw you in to buy their product. All that stuff that is associated with graphic design, advertising, media. Better bet your ass that those people that are creating those things are thinking about this stuff. They probably have whole psychological studies, right, on what font size is received the best, what color, what font style, what colors you might want to use in an imagistic form, right? Color theory, that's what all that is based on too. And then we've already mentioned formatting. So how the things are arranged. If I try to write out an advertisement, let's say, for the new toothpaste I've invented, I'm not going to write a paragraph with the first sentence indented in Times New Roman 12-point font on a white piece of paper. I'm going to have maybe 5 words. New toothpaste, low price, picture $4.99. Right? I don't need to go into a long diatribe about why you should buy my toothpaste. That's going to turn you off. You're going to be like, what the hell is this guy writing? A fucking research paper? I'm not reading all that. Can't even read it. Like, I have to get up close to it to see that tiny font. Right? Okay. So all that stuff is stuff that's going to influence whether or not someone is persuasive in their writing. How about speech? This one is going to be more fun for me. I get to be a little bit more animated here. Ooh. Just like in writing, if you're giving a speech, if you're talking to someone, if you're communicating with someone verbally, there are certain things that you're going to want to think about if you are sincerely trying to invoke a feeling, convince them, persuade them. Again, a lot of these are going to overlap. But there are going to be some that are different, that are unique to the verbal mode of information transference. There you go. I just said a ridiculous, I ended the sentence with a ridiculous phrase. Informational transference. Does that land better for you than you're picking up what I'm throwing down? Maybe that lands better, depending on who the audience is. Same thing with lack of words used, right? Let's say I'm giving a speech on, I don't know, redlining. And I never bring up race. You might wonder, why isn't he talking about that? What's going on there? Why did he leave that out? Doesn't seem like the subject is complete without a mentioning of that, maybe. Again, we could do the Yoda thing if you wanted me to. Or sentence, put words, order whatever want I, you understand. Blaze is like, I don't know. Obviously, if you're trying to convey something, you need to put it in a way that people can grasp. If you go around talking like Yoda to everybody, they're going to think you're a weirdo. They're not going to buy your toothpaste. Unless, I don't know, a Star Wars movie just came out and everybody loves Yoda and Baby Yoda. And then they're like, yeah, look at that. Ooh, it's even Yoda themed. The first few of these are going to be the same. Connotations of words. Words just don't mean what their dictionary definition says. You all know this, right? If someone calls you a cheater, that means a very different thing depending on who's saying it to you, the context, etc. Right? And tone here is very important. If I gave a lecture like this, speaking in a monotone voice the whole time without any breaks between my words, would you listen to me and understand? I don't think so. Yeah, right? Exactly. Or if I'm more animated, and I give kind of a jovial tone, and I'm joking around, and I keep your attention, you know, you'll listen to me. Because you're like, wow, this guy's kind of weird. I've never had a professor like this before. I can't look away. This is a train wreck. I don't know. So yes, tone is going to determine how your speech lands. You're going to want to use different tones depending on who you're talking to, what you're talking about, the subject matter, what you're trying to achieve. Sentence structure, we've already been over that. Just apply what we know from the previous slide. But then there are some other things that we might want to consider specifically for speech. Cadence of voice. The rhythm of your voice often has an impact on how people receive the information you're giving them. Slight pauses here and there, irregular structure, allows the information to seep into the mind. Or if I just talk really fast all the time and you don't know what I'm saying because you can't follow it all that quickly, right? This is incredibly important when you give speeches. A lot of people talk very fast. They're probably nervous and stuff. The audience needs to be able to follow what you have to say. And if you can somehow speak in a cadence that triggers some sort of emotion or memory, or is in line with how they communicate with others, they'll receive what you have to say more willingly, right? Speed is associated with this. Cadence, we could say, is rhythm. Speed is like how fast the rhythm is, right? Let me ask you this. Are you going to listen to a whole lecture like that and follow it? Hell no. I'm like the sloth in Zootopia, okay? That's not cool. Nobody wants to listen to that. Speed matters. Not too fast, not too slow. Pauses, rests, like in music, are good. They maintain attention. And you can use certain words and pronunciations to play off of this. Okay? This is what poets do all the time, whether they're writing it or speaking it. This is what people who do slam poetry, right? They're concerned with all of this to produce a kind of experience in the audience. If I talk like this at the front of the room, can you understand what I'm saying and like follow the lecture? Exactly, right? You're like, what are you saying? You don't want to talk too softly. You don't want to shout either. Unless I'm trying to wake you up, maybe. I don't know. So, I know this is common sense. I know you're like, why are we going over this? But has anybody ever made it explicit to you that these things impact persuasion? It's stuff that we don't spend a lot of time thinking about. We just do it unconsciously, right? We are socially conditioned into a certain manner of speaking with certain words, certain structure and all of that. But playing with that stuff, playing off of it, employing these things with an intentional design is what rhetoric is all about. If I talk like I'm kind of unsure about the topic, do you think you're going to listen? Right, I don't sound confident. But if I project my voice a little bit, if I make it seem like I've talked about this before, that I don't even have to think about the words, that they just come naturally out of me because I'm a seasoned lecturer, are you more willing to listen to what I have to say and accept it? Yeah, you are. Right? So there you go. Tone matters. And you know this already. You deal with it every day. You just don't consciously think about it. Inflections are not a huge part of English. We use inflections for various purposes. I would say it's more important, say, like in Mandarin or Cantonese. But these can be important as well. If you're asking a question, do you notice what your voice does? Here, I'll try to do it so you can see it graphically. Over the course of the sentence, you'll start off here, and then you'll probably go down a little bit, and you'll end on a higher note. Do you want to get Taco Bell tonight? Right? That comes across very differently than, do you want to get Taco Bell tonight? Ending on a lower note, right? That almost sounds like, I fucking knew she wanted Taco Bell. I'm sick of Taco Bell. I don't want to get Taco Bell, right? Whereas the proper inflection doesn't make it seem like you're pissed off, right? And you can put inflections in different words to have different effects. You'll just have to play with this stuff and see how people react to it. People are going to respond differently because it depends on their personality, their ideals, their views, their culture, their education, right? All that stuff. And then more specifically, we can talk about pauses in speech. I've been showcasing this the entire lecture. I don't just speak continuously. If I did, you wouldn't be able to hang on to my words. The information would get lost. It wouldn't sink in. My ability to persuade you would have gone down. So knowing when to speed through a section of speech or when to pause can be used to dramatic effect. Okay. What time do we have? 10 minutes. Okay, I think we can get through it. So, those are some considerations for rhetoric in writing and speech. But we can find rhetoric also in graphical representations. Cartoons, TV shows, movies, pictures, paintings, all that stuff. Okay? So what are some of the things that we care about when we're looking at art and cartoons and stuff like that and media, but more specifically, the person that we're communicating with? Let's start there.
What was the question?
If I'm trying to persuade you of something and we're talking, what would my appearance be like if I was trying to convince you of something and you were convinced? What would you be looking for, or what would matter to you?
How clean, like how nice you look.
Clean, like if I'm dressed well, right? How about if I have messy hair, right? Like if I just like came out of bed, right, and I didn't shower my hair. Yeah, totally. Whether or not I'm wearing jewelry, accessories, right, watches, rings, all that stuff.
Your shoes too.
Shoes? What do you think of these?
They cool.
Cool, nice. Yeah, all that stuff matters, right? Because when you're talking to somebody in person, your appearance is going to strike them in a certain way. Facial expressions. You do this already. It would be improper to try to convince someone to give you money and you're telling a personal story about how your friend died from a drug overdose and you're smiling the whole time. You're like, yeah, my buddy Ricky, he's dead now. Give me some money. Start a campaign against drugs. You're like, this guy is insane, right? Why is he smiling right now? Showing lack of emotion, for example, lack of a powerful facial expression, dramatic facial expression, that's good for negotiation. In poker, right? You don't want to give your hand away. Otherwise, you're sharing information with your competitors. How you hold yourself. If I kind of shrink down like this, you're not going to see me as an authority on the subject matter, right? But if instead I kind of put my chest out a little bit and I walk tall and confidently, you're like, okay, that guy knows what he's talking about probably, right? Shoulders back a little bit. Right. Whether or not you're moving, this is going to impact how your speech lands. I move around. It's just something that I do. But I think it actually captures the attention because, again, if I was just standing still the whole time, there's nothing changing. You're going to get bored looking at me, right? So how you're moving, if you're moving, your arms, your feet, your torso, all that stuff. How the speaker looks, right? If I look clean, if my teeth are not rotted out, right? If somebody approaches you on the street and their teeth are rotted out, you might be like, oh, I don't know. I don't really want to talk to you, right? Like, I don't know who you are. Have you been living on the streets? Versus, a guy in a nice suit who walks up to you. He's got the little handkerchief, clean cut, nice haircut. You're like, oh, I wonder what this guy wants, right? We've already talked about clothing and accessories. Are you dressed for the occasion? Are you dressed for the purpose of your persuasion or not? If you're dressed in rags, people are probably going to try to avoid you, right? If you look nice, people, that might cause them to think better of you. But it also depends on the occasion, right? You're not going to show up to a costume party and try to convince everybody your costume is the best when you're not wearing a costume. You're not going to convince anybody like that, right? But if you're dressed like Barney and you went all out with it, then maybe. Whether or not somebody has props that they use, or examples, artifacts is what I call them. Doesn't have to be a human invention. You could pick up a rock and use that as an example or whatever. But oftentimes that change in sensory stimuli will captivate the attention of the person more than if I didn't use any props. Okay, finally, let's talk about imagery. Because rhetoric doesn't just show up in writing and speech. It also shows up, like I said before, in art, movies, political cartoons, right? Newspaper comics, all of that stuff. So do we have any artists in the room? Or anybody that knows about art? Kinda. What are some things that you might play with in order to, paint something or draw something? What art do you do?
I paint. I actually have paint on my hands.
Okay, so what are you thinking about when you're painting something?
I don't really look at pictures, so honestly, just whatever comes to mind at the time.
Okay.
A certain color will I make you think something?
Color, yeah. Yep, color theory, again, we mentioned that before. Certain colors seem to inspire certain emotions in people. That's why they say don't paint your walls of your house fire truck red. You're not supposed to paint the walls of your house like bright red, because people have found that tends to make people irritable and angry. So color, what else?
Maybe like different textures of styles too.
If there's textures, yeah. What's required for applying different textures?
Different paint or like a different medium or something.
Different materials, different medium, different technique, right? Dropping paint on the canvas, or like a smooth line, or like, doing the speckly thing.
I would say repetition too. That can change someone's idea of something.
Absolutely. Repetition. Yes. Was that one that was in the book? Did they talk about that in the reading? Oh, that's definitely true, especially in speech and writing, right? And some people use that imagistically as well. Yeah, absolutely. Again, I'm not going to list them all here. These are just some things that people use. We could talk about the art style. Is it a painting? Is it a photograph? Is it a drawing? Is it a particular kind of drawing, like a manga drawing, right, that has a particular style to it? What kind of art are we talking about? That's going to have an impact. Oil painting, acrylic, watercolor. Colors used or lack of colors used. Sometimes using full color can be effective. Sometimes switching all of a sudden to black and white can be really effective. The medium, right? What is carrying the art piece, you could say? Is it on a canvas? Is it, the internet? Is it a manga book? Is it a piece of paper? Technique, which we talked about. Drawing with sharp lines is going to produce a very different feeling than somebody who's very smooth and flowy with what their art looks like. How the objects in the work are represented in space. Are they far apart? Are they clustered together? Is there something in the center of the piece? Is there something kind of off to the side and that's the only object there? How does the artist play with those things? Or with the space, the negative space of the piece? What is the piece about? Maybe you'd be more willing to donate to a cause that is about decreasing rates of rape if you saw a photograph of an actual rape versus a child's drawing. I don't know why anybody would ask a child to do that, but you know what I mean? Like, that's going to impact how the piece lands. Come on. Is that done? Okay. So, rhetoric comes in a variety of forms and manifestations. We see it in speech, we see it in writing, we see it in music, movies, TV shows, political cartoons, political messaging, all of that stuff. Okay? Books, whatever, articles. Rhetoric is the art or study of persuasion using a text. Logical argumentation is just one subtype of rhetoric. Okay? So while we're going to be dealing a lot with that specific kind of rhetoric in this class, you should know that there are a lot of other techniques and things that you can do to persuade someone of something, and techniques that are being used on you as we speak, whether you realize it or not. Sound good? Okay. Great. We'll finish this up on Tuesday. We'll finish up rhetoric. And then on Thursday, we'll jump into our first case study. Thank you, everybody, for coming. I hope you all found this informational.